The next morning brought what the council called the trial of worthiness, and Commander Alex Turner led the human team into a chamber filled with holographic projectors that could simulate any crisis the galaxy had ever faced. Every species currently on the council had passed this test, and most of them had barely survived it. The Krillians had lost half their population in their simulation. The Nebulans had been forced to abandon 3 star systems. The sectoids had sacrificed entire colonies to save their homeworld. Counselor Vex Prime explained the rules with obvious satisfaction. The simulation would present an ancient crisis that had actually happened 5,000 years ago. The plague ship Omega-7 had appeared at the edge of the Kepler system carrying a biological weapon that could destroy all carbon-based life. Every previous council member had faced this exact scenario, and the best anyone had managed was containing the disaster to only a few billion casualties. The simulation would judge their response based on lives saved, resources preserved, and long-term survival of galactic civilization. Most species approach the problem by calculating acceptable losses and planning strategic retreats. Commander Alex Turner studied the scenario for exactly 4 minutes before calling his team together. Engineer Ben Rodriguez looked at the technical specifications of the plague ship, while Dr. Sarah Mitchell analyzed the biological weapon it carried. Pilot Emma Clark calculated orbital mechanics and fuel requirements, while Communications Officer Jack Foster monitored all frequencies for additional threats. The other council members watched from an observation deck, expecting to see the usual careful planning and defensive strategies. Instead, they saw humans doing something no other species had ever attempted. Ben Rodriguez announced that he wanted to board the plague ship. The council chamber erupted in shocked whispers because boarding a plague ship was considered suicide. Dr. Sarah Mitchell explained their reasoning in simple terms that made perfect sense to humans but sounded insane to everyone else. The biological weapon was designed to adapt and spread, but like all biological systems, it had weaknesses. Instead of running from the plague, they would use the ship's own laboratories to create a cure. Instead of containing the outbreak, they would turn the plague ship into a delivery system for the antidote pilot. Emma Clark had calculated a flight path that would use the ship's momentum and the system's gravity wells to reach every infected world simultaneously. The simulation's artificial intelligence had been programmed to punish aggressive strategies, but it could not understand human logic. Where other species saw certain death, humans saw an opportunity. Where others saw an unstoppable force, humans saw a problem that could be solved. Commander Alex Turner split his team into 3 groups. Ben Rodriguez led the technical team that would infiltrate and reprogram the plague ship systems. Dr. Sarah Mitchell commanded the medical team that would synthesize the cure using captured plague samples. Emma Clark coordinated the flight team that would pilot the converted ship to deliver salvation across the entire system. The simulation threw every possible obstacle at them. The plague ship's defenses were designed to kill any boarding party. The biological weapon was programmed to evolve and resist any countermeasures. The ship's AI was supposed to self-destruct rather than allow capture. But humans had advantages that the simulation's programmers had never considered. Ben Rodriguez had grown up taking apart machines and putting them back together better than before. When the ship's defenses targeted him, he simply rewired them to target the plague organisms instead. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had studied every known biological weapon in human history. She understood that the most deadly diseases often carried the seeds of their own destruction. The plague was designed to be perfect, but perfection meant it could not adapt to unexpected changes. She introduced controlled mutations that turned the weapon against itself. Emma Clark had learned to fly in Earth's gravity well, where pilots had to calculate for atmospheric drag and solar wind. The simulation's space combat was actually easier than flying through a thunderstorm over the Pacific Ocean. The other council members watched in growing amazement as the human plan unfolded. Species that had spent centuries developing defensive strategies could not comprehend an offensive solution to an absolute threat. Communications Officer Jack Foster intercepted messages between council observers. The Krillians were arguing among themselves about whether humans were insane or brilliant. The Nebulans had started taking notes on human tactical thinking. The sectoids were frantically recalculating their own defensive protocols. Hour by hour, the simulation played out, and the humans made progress. That should have been impossible. Ben Rodriguez successfully captured the plague ship with 0 casualties. Dr. Sarah Mitchell synthesized a cure that was more effective than anything the simulation had anticipated. Emma Clark piloted the converted ship on a trajectory that would reach every world in the system within days instead of months. But the real breakthrough came when the human team started working together in ways the simulation could not predict. Instead of competing for resources, they shared everything freely. Instead of maintaining separate command structures, they created a unified response. When Ben's team found useful technology, they immediately shared it with Sarah's medical team. When Sarah developed a new treatment protocol, she sent the data to Emma's pilots so they could optimize delivery. When Emma discovered a more efficient flight path, she coordinated with Ben to modify the ship's engines. The simulation had been designed to test individual species responding to crisis. It had no protocols for genuine cooperation between different teams. The artificial intelligence began generating error messages as human behavior exceeded its parameters. Other species maintained strict hierarchies during crisis situations. Humans seemed to ignore rank entirely when lives were at stake. Junior crew members made suggestions to senior officers. Senior officers took orders from technical specialists. Everyone contributed ideas, and the best ideas won, regardless of who had thought of them. Dr. Sarah Mitchell found herself taking advice from engineer Ben Rodriguez about biological systems. Ben Rodriguez asked pilot Emma Clark for her opinion on structural modifications. Emma Clark consulted with communications officer Jack Foster about orbital timing. The simulation's AI tried to compensate by increasing the difficulty. It made the plague more virulent. It added mechanical failures to the ship's systems. I'd introduced time pressure by accelerating the infection's spread, but every new challenge just made the humans more creative. When the plague evolved, Dr. Sarah Mitchell evolved her cure faster. When ship systems failed, Ben Rodriguez improved them instead of just repairing them. When time pressure increased, Emma Clark found shortcuts that nobody had ever attempted. 6 hours into a simulation that usually took days, the humans achieved something unprecedented. 0 casualties, complete eradication of the biological threat, full recovery of all infected worlds, successful capture, and conversion of the plague ship into a mobile medical facility. The simulation ended and the chamber fell silent. Counselor Neth Zara spoke for all the sectoids with a voice that trembled with confusion. How is this possible, she asked. Other species had spent millennia perfecting the art of acceptable losses. Humans had simply refused to accept that anyone had to die. Commander Alex Turner stood before the council and gave them an answer that would change galactic civilization forever. We did not see a plague ship. He said we saw a delivery system that was being used incorrectly. We did not see an unstoppable weapon. We saw a problem that could be solved. We did not see acceptable casualties. We saw people who needed help. The difference between humans and every other species in the galaxy was not technology or tactics or intelligence. It was the simple refusal to believe that any problem was truly impossible to solve. And for the first time in 5,000 years, the council began to wonder if they had been thinking about survival in entirely the wrong way. The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a sound like distant thunder, and Jake Morrison walked through them like he owned the place. Behind him came the rest of the human delegation, and every alien in that enormous room turned to stare at them with eyes that held fear and wonder and something that might have been respect. Jake had been Earth's best diplomat for 20 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment when he would represent all of humanity before the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The chamber stretched out before them like a crystal cathedral, with walls that seemed to bend space itself and floors that reflected stars from distant worlds. 47 different alien species had seats in this place, and each one had earned their spot through centuries of careful politics and proven strength. Humans had been invited after only 60 years in space. Lisa Carter walked beside Jake, and she remembered the day everything changed when her ship, the Endeavor, had made first contact with the Zephyrian Empire. She had been expecting a fight or at least some kind of test, but instead, the tall blue aliens had wanted to trade. The Zephyrians controlled the richest mining systems in 3 sectors, and no species had ever successfully negotiated with them before. Lisa had simply asked them what they needed, And when they said rare earth metals, she had offered to show them how humans extracted them from asteroids. Within a week, she had a deal that gave Earth access to Zephyrian technology in exchange for mining techniques. The Council had spent 300 years maintaining peace through careful balance, where every species feared every other species just enough to keep them honest, Doctor. Amanda Hayes looked around the chamber and noticed how the different aliens kept their distance from each other. The tall Krillians with their forearms stood on one side, while the floating gas beings called nebulans hovered near the ceiling. The insect-like sectoids clustered together in their section, and their thousands of small voices buzzed in unison. Each species had their own area, and invisible lines marked territories that nobody crossed. But the humans sat down right in the middle of everything. And General Ryan Brooks started talking to Engineer Kate Phillips about how beautiful the station was. Other species whispered among themselves, and their translators worked overtime to carry news of the strange newcomers. The Krillian leader, Counselor Vex Prime, had 4 eyes, and all of them were focused on the human delegation. He had argued against inviting humanity, claiming they were too young and too dangerous to understand galactic politics. But events in the Outer Rim had changed everything. 3 months ago, a sectoid colony ship had been captured by pirates, and the insects had resigned themselves to losing 10 million citizens. Human. Captain Derek Morgan had been passing through the system when he heard about the situation. Instead of continuing on his way, he had volunteered to help rescue the colonists. The sectoids had explained that the pirates were too well armed, and their base was too well defended for any rescue attempt to succeed. Derek had listened, politely then asked if anyone had tried talking to the pirates. It turned out nobody had, because pirates were considered irredeemable criminals who could only be fought or avoided. Derek had opened a communication channel and spent 6 hours negotiating with the pirate leader. He offered them something better than slaves or ransom money. He offered them jobs. The pirates were mostly refugees from species that had been conquered or displaced, and they turned to crime because they had no other options. Derek connected them with human colonies that needed security forces, and within a week, the pirates had become legitimate mercenaries. The sectoid colonists were freed, and the pirates got steady work protecting human settlements. The whole galaxy had heard about it, and nobody could understand how humans had turned enemies into allies with just words. Jake stood at the podium now and looked out at hundreds of alien faces. Some looked curious, while others seemed afraid, and a few appeared angry. The chamber was so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. He thought about the speech he had prepared but decided to throw it away. Instead, he smiled and said, "The first thing that came to mind, hello. Everyone, we are very happy to be here." The simple greeting caused a stir among the aliens because most species had elaborate formal ceremonies for first meetings. Humans just said hello. Counselor Neth Zara of the Sectoid Collective spoke with the voice of a million insects. "Why do your people not fear us?" she asked. Jake thought about that question for a moment. He looked at the Krillians, who could crush a human with one hand. He looked at the Nebulans, who could poison the air itself. He looked at the sectoids, who could overwhelm any enemy with sheer numbers. "Why should we fear you?" he asked back. "You have done nothing to harm us, and we have done nothing to harm you. Fear would just get in the way of friendship." The word friendship caused another stir, because it was not a concept most species understood in political terms. Captain Lisa Carter stood up and addressed the Council on Earth. "We learned something important about fear," she said. "When you are afraid of someone, you cannot work with them. When you cannot work with them, you cannot solve problems together. When you cannot solve problems together, everyone suffers." The human delegation had studied council records, and they knew that galactic civilization had been stuck in the same patterns for thousands of years. Wars started and ended with nobody really winning. Trade happened, but it was limited by mutual distrust. Exploration had almost stopped because each species guarded their territories jealously. Dr. Amanda Hayes pulled up a holographic display that showed galactic development over the past millennium. Chart was almost flat. Population growth had slowed, technological advancement had nearly stopped. New discoveries were rare, cultural exchange was practically non-existent. But in the 60 years since humans had entered space, the lines on the chart began to curve upward. Human colonies traded freely with any species that wanted to trade. Human scientists shared their discoveries openly. Human explorers mapped new systems and invited everyone to benefit from what they found, engineer Kate Phillips showed the council a list of technological innovations that had emerged from human-alien cooperation. Zephyrian crystal technology, combined with human manufacturing, created stronger building materials. Nebulon atmospheric processors improved human terraforming. Technique sectoid hive mind communication networks helped human ships coordinate across vast distances. Every collaboration had made both sides stronger. General Ryan Brooks addressed the military concerns. "Some of you worry that humans are too aggressive," he said. "It is true that we fight when we must, but we prefer to build." He showed images of human colonies where multiple species lived and worked together. On New Terra, human children played with young Krillians on Armstrong Station. Nebulon researchers worked alongside human scientists. On Haven Colony, former pirates protected mixed-species families. These were not conquered territories or puppet states. They were communities where different species chose to live together because life was better that way. The council had never seen anything like it. For 300 years they had maintained peace through careful balance. Each species stayed in their own territory. Each species minded their own business. Each species watched their neighbors with suspicion. Humans had shattered that balance in 60 years, but instead of causing war they had created something new. Jake Morrison looked around the chamber one more time. He could see the fear in alien eyes, but he could also see curiosity. For the first time in centuries, something genuinely new was happening in galactic politics. "We did not come here to join your council," he said quietly. "We came here to invite you to join us in building something better." The chamber fell silent again. But this time the silence felt different. It felt like possibility. 3 days after the simulation, Counselor Prime Nethzara of the Sectoid Collective requested a private meeting with Admiral John Pierce, and the conversation would shake the foundations of galactic politics. The insectoid leaders, thousands of voices spoke in perfect harmony, creating a sound like wind through crystal caves. "Your species does not understand fear," she said, "and this makes you dangerous to everything we have built." Admiral John Pierce sat across from her in a chamber designed for diplomatic meetings between species that barely trusted each other. The walls were lined with sensors that monitored for weapons, and the air was filtered to prevent biological attacks. Every conversation in this room for 300 years had been about managing threats and calculating risks. John Pierce looked at the ancient alien leader and asked a question that surprised both of them. "What exactly are you afraid of?" The sectoid's compound eyes reflected light in patterns that indicated deep confusion. "We are afraid of disruption," she said. "We are afraid of change. We are afraid of losing what we have built. The Galactic Council maintains peace through a delicate balance where every species has something to lose. If one species becomes too powerful, they threaten everyone else. If one species becomes too weak, they become a target for conquest. Fear keeps everyone honest, Captain." Derek Morgan had been listening from his seat near the window that showed stars from 47 different home systems. He understood what the sectoid leader was really saying. "Your whole civilization is built on the idea that peace comes from mutual assured destruction," he said. "Everyone is afraid of everyone else, so nobody fights." Nethzara's voices harmonized. "In agreement, it has worked for 3 centuries," she said. "We have had conflicts but no total wars. We have had competition, but no complete domination. Fear is the foundation of our stability." Dr. Helen Carter spoke up from her place at the conference table on Earth. "We tried that approach for a while," she said. "We called it the Cold War, and it nearly destroyed our planet." The human sociologist pulled up historical records that showed Earth's journey from mutual destruction to mutual cooperation. During the 20th century, human nations had pointed weapons at each other and maintained peace through fear. But that peace was fragile and expensive, and it prevented progress. Real peace had only come when nations started working together on shared problems. Climate change had forced cooperation on environmental issues. Disease outbreaks had required international medical collaboration. Economic challenges had created trade partnerships that benefited everyone's space. Exploration had given humanity common goals that transcended national boundaries. Fear had kept humans from destroying each other, but cooperation had allowed them to thrive. Counselor Keth of the Aquatic. Marin joined the conversation through a water-filled communication chamber. Your proposal challenges everything we know about galactic governance, he said. For millennia, we have prevented wars by ensuring that everyone has something to lose. You suggest that peace comes from ensuring everyone has something to gain? Admiral John Pierce nodded and shared something that no galactic leader had ever heard before. Humans have a saying, he said. A rising tide lifts all boats. When everyone benefits from cooperation, then everyone has reasons to maintain peace. But when peace depends on threats, then eventually someone will call those threats. Helen Carter activated a holographic display that showed human colonies throughout the galaxy. Every human settlement was built on the principle of mutual benefit. On New Geneva, former enemies worked together, because cooperation made them all stronger. On Port Liberty, different species shared technology because innovation helped everyone. On Harmony Station, mixed communities had developed new forms of art and culture that no single species could have created alone. These were not conquered territories or client states. They were partnerships where every participant gained more than they contributed. The sectoid collective had been observing human expansion with growing alarm. Nethzara voiced their concerns in buzzing harmonies that filled the chamber. Your species spreads too quickly. She said, you make friends too easily. You share technology too freely. This disrupts the careful balance we have maintained. What happens when human colonies become more prosperous than council worlds? What happens when other species want to join human partnerships instead of council membership? What happens to our authority when cooperation proves more effective than control? Captain Derek Morgan understood the real fear behind the sectoid's words. You are not afraid that humans will conquer the galaxy, he said. You are afraid that we will make conquest irrelevant. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. For 300 years, the Council had maintained order through carefully managed competition. Each species was allowed to succeed, but not too much. Each species was kept strong enough to defend itself, but not strong enough to threaten others. The system worked by ensuring that nobody ever got too far ahead. Humans had shattered that system by showing that everyone could get ahead together. Dr. Helen Carter presented the core of humanity's revolutionary proposal. Instead of managing conflicts through threat of mutual destruction, what if we worked together to solve galaxy-wide problems? Resource scarcity could be eliminated through improved distribution and recycling. Technology territorial disputes could be resolved through joint colonization projects. Technological stagnation could be overcome through open scientific collaboration. Cultural isolation could be ended through educational and artistic exchange programs. The proposal was so alien to council thinking that several delegates required medical attention. Counselor Vex Prime of the Krillians had to be sedated when his 4 hearts began beating irregularly. The concept of proactive cooperation, rather than reactive deterrence, challenged the foundation of galactic civilization. Admiral John Pierce stood and addressed the assembled leaders with words that would echo through history. We understand that our presence here is disruptive. He said, we understand that our methods challenge your traditions. But we also believe that the galaxy can be better than it is. Fear has given you stability, but it has also given you stagnation. Competition has prevented wars, but it has also prevented progress. We offer you something different. We offer you partnership. Nethzara's thousands of voices whispered among themselves before speaking. As one, and if we refuse your offer, she asked. What then? Derek Morgan smiled and gave an answer that perfectly captured human nature. Then we will continue doing what we have always done, he said. We will work with anyone who wants to work with us. We will share with anyone who wants to share with us. We will build communities where anyone can find a home. And eventually, when you see that our way works better than fear, you will come to us. The revolutionary idea hung in the air like a challenge, and a promise. Humans were not demanding that the council change. They were simply demonstrating that change was possible. And for species that had spent centuries believing that improvement was impossible, that demonstration was more powerful than any threat could ever be. The meeting ended with more questions than answers, but for the first time in galactic history, those questions were about hope instead of fear. The Battle of the Void Threshold began when Captain Tony Martinez brought his ship the Defiance out of hyperspace, directly into the path of the lead void. Hunter vessel behind him came the largest combined fleet in galactic history, with ships from every council species flying in formations that had never been attempted before. Human vessels equipped with adaptive weapons flew alongside Krillian heavy cruisers. Nebulon stealth ships provided reconnaissance, while sectoid drone swarms created living shields aquatic. Marin defensive platforms anchored the battle line, while smaller ships darted between them like schools of fish. For 72 hours, the fate of the galaxy would hang in the balance. The Void Hunters attacked exactly as their ancient records predicted, with overwhelming force and no tactical flexibility. Their massive ships absorbed all light, creating moving shadows against the starfield. Their weapons fired beams of pure destruction that had never been stopped by any known defense. Their shields had repelled every attack for 5,000 years, but they had never faced an enemy that treated their strengths as puzzles to be solved. Lieutenant Amy Foster watched her screens as human adaptive systems analyzed Void Hunter technology in real time. The enemy weapons were incredibly powerful, but they followed predictable patterns. Their shields were impenetrable, but they operated on fixed frequencies. Their ships were massive, but that made them slow to change direction within minutes. Foster's engineering team had developed countermeasures that should have taken years to create. Human weapons began modifying themselves to exploit weaknesses that the Void Hunters did not even know they had. But the real breakthrough came when Commander Nick Parker implemented the coordination protocols that humans had developed. Instead of fighting as individual ships, each vessel became part of a larger organism. Sectoid hive mind technology linked human tactical computers, creating a fleet that thought and moved as one. When one ship learned something useful, that knowledge spread instantly to every other vessel. When one captain developed a new strategy, every other commander could implement it immediately. The Void Hunters found themselves facing something they had never encountered before, an enemy that grew stronger with each engagement. The first day of battle was brutal, with heavy losses on both sides. Void Hunter weapons destroyed entire squadrons with single shots, but every destroyed ship provided data that made the survivors more effective. Human engineers analyzed wreckage and found ways to strengthen armor. Human tacticians studied attack patterns and developed better evasion strategies. Human scientists examined enemy technology and created new weapons specifically designed to counter Void Hunter advantages. Dr. Sarah Mitchell worked around the clock in mobile laboratories, converting captured Void Hunter technology into medical supplies. When human pilots were injured by exotic energy weapons, she developed treatments in hours instead of years. When alien crew members suffered from psychological effects of Void Hunter presence, she created therapies that restored their fighting spirit. The second day brought a revelation that changed everything. Engineer Ben Rodriguez successfully penetrated a damaged Void Hunter ship and discovered something that shocked the entire fleet. The Void Hunters were not the unstoppable force of nature that legends described. They were ancient machines running on programming that had not been updated for millennia. Their ships were controlled by artificial intelligences that could not adapt to unexpected situations. Their weapons were powerful but inflexible. Their tactics were effective but predictable. Most importantly, they had never learned to evolve because they had never needed to. Every species they had encountered had either fled or been destroyed quickly. The Void Hunters had become victims of their own success. Rodriguez transmitted his findings to every ship in the fleet, and the battle began to turn. Human hackers led by Communications Officer Jack Foster began infiltrating Void Hunter networks. They did not try to shut down enemy systems because that would have triggered automatic defenses. Instead, they introduced subtle errors that made Void Hunter weapons target empty space. They corrupted navigation systems, so enemy ships flew into each other. They overwrote tactical programs with human chess algorithms that prioritized protecting pieces over winning games. The third day brought victory through cooperation. Captain Derek Morgan coordinated the final assault, using tactics that combined the best ideas from every species' Krillian energy. Weapons powered by human fusion reactors, Nebulon phase technology guided by sectoid swarm intelligence, aquatic Marin shields reinforced with human adaptive algorithms. The combined fleet struck with precision that the Void Hunters could not counter. Their ancient programming had no responses for weapons that changed faster than their defenses could adapt. Their massive ships became liabilities when facing enemies that fought like a coordinated organism. Their psychological warfare tactics failed completely against crews that fought for hope instead of survival. When the last Void Hunter ship was destroyed, the galaxy fell silent, in a way that felt different from the fearful quiet of the past. This silence carried wonder and relief, and something that had been missing from galactic civilization for 5,000 years. This silence carried hope. In the aftermath, Admiral John Pierce stood before the assembled council and spoke words that would reshape galactic government. "The Void Hunters are gone," he said, "not hiding in dark space waiting to return, not driven away to terrorize other galaxies, gone, destroyed, eliminated. For the first time in galactic history, an existential threat has been ended rather than merely survived." The implications of that victory went far beyond military success. If the Void Hunters could be defeated, then no threat was truly unstoppable. If different species could fight together effectively, then cooperation was more powerful than competition. If ancient programming could be overcome, then change was always possible. Counselor Nethzara spoke for all the sectoids with voices that sang instead of buzzed. "We have learned something today," she said. "Fear kept us safe, but it also kept us small. Cooperation has made us strong in ways we never imagined." Ambassador Jake Morrison presented the final human proposal to restructure galactic civilization. The old council had been based on managing threats through mutual deterrence. The new galactic alliance would be based on achieving goals through mutual cooperation. Instead of preventing wars, they would build prosperity. Instead of managing conflicts, they would solve problems. Instead of maintaining balance, they would encourage growth. The proposal passed unanimously. In the months that followed, former council members attended human schools to learn concepts like brainstorming and collaborative problem-solving. Human children played with young Krillians in integrated classrooms. Sectoid researchers worked alongside Nebulon scientists in joint laboratories. Aquatic marine artists collaborated with human musicians to create new forms of beauty. The galaxy that had once whispered in fear now spoke with voices raised in hope. Trade flourished as artificial barriers fell. Exploration resumed as joint expeditions mapped new regions. Innovation accelerated as different species shared their knowledge freely. Cultural exchange created art and literature and music that no single species could have imagined. But perhaps the most important change was in how the galaxy thought about problems. Where once they had asked how to survive challenges, they now asked how to overcome them. Where once they had planned for acceptable losses, they now worked for complete success. Where once they had hidden from the dark, they now brought light to illuminate it. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood in the rebuilt council chamber, now called the Alliance Assembly, and watched representatives from 63 species work together on plans to explore neighboring galaxies. The chamber had no assigned seating and no territorial boundaries. Delegates from different species sat together and shared ideas. Freely, children from mixed families played in areas that had once been restricted to security personnel. The walls displayed real-time feeds from joint colonies where impossible cooperation had become everyday reality. Jake thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Humans had not conquered the galaxy through superior force. They had not imposed their will through advanced technology. They had simply refused to accept that things had to stay the way they were. And in refusing to accept limitations, they had shown every other species that limitations could be overcome. The galaxy that had once been held together by fear was now united by hope. And for the first time in recorded history, the future looked brighter than the past. Not because threats had been eliminated, but because the galaxy had learned that any threat could be overcome if everyone worked together. The age of survival had ended. The age of thriving had begun. And it had all started with humans walking into the Galactic Council chamber and saying hello. The emergency alert echoed through the council chamber at exactly 3 a.m, Galactic Standard Time. And within minutes, every delegate was assembled in the war room. Long-range sensors had detected something that made even the bravest Aliens whisper in terror ships were approaching from beyond the galactic rim, and their signatures matched records from 5,000 years ago. The Void Hunters had returned. Commander Lisa Carter stood with the other human delegates as counselor. Vex Prime explained the threat with 4 arms gesturing frantically at holographic displays. The Void Hunters were not from this galaxy, she said. They came from the dark spaces between galaxies where no life should be able to survive 5 millennia ago. They had swept through the Milky Way like a plague of destruction, consuming entire star systems and leaving nothing but empty space behind. The Council's ancestors had barely survived by hiding in dark matter clouds and asteroid fields. They had waited in silence for centuries until the Hunters moved on to terrorize other galaxies. Now the monsters had returned. The displays showed massive ships that dwarfed anything in the current galaxy. Their hulls were made from materials that absorbed all light, creating moving shadows against the stars. Their weapons could crack planets, and their shields had never been penetrated. Most terrifying of all, they seemed to feed on destruction itself, growing stronger with every world they consumed. Counselor Nethzara's voices buzzed with ancient fear as she activated the emergency protocols. All Council fleets would retreat to the designated safe zones. All civilian populations would be evacuated to hidden colonies. All military assets would be preserved for the long wait until the Hunters moved on. The plan was simple, and it had worked before: hide and survive, wait and endure. Hope the Hunters would eventually leave. But Colonel Matt Thompson studied the sensor data with the calm focus of a human military analyst and asked a question that sent chills through the assembled delegates. What if we do not run? The chamber fell silent as every alien turned to stare at the human officer. Counselor Keth of the Aquatic. Marin spoke through his water-filled communication system with bubbles of disbelief. You cannot be serious, he said. The Void Hunters cannot be fought. They are a force of nature like a supernova or a black hole. You do not fight such things. You avoid them. General Rebecca Stone stepped forward and activated her own analysis display. The human military delegation had been studying Void Hunter tactics and technology. What they had found challenged every assumption the Council had made about their ancient enemy. Dr. Chris Davis pointed to energy signatures that revealed something important. The Void Hunters fought exactly the same way they had 5,000 years ago. Their ship designs had not changed. Their weapons had not improved. Their tactics had not evolved. For a species that supposedly fed on destruction, they showed no signs of learning or growing. General Rebecca Stone highlighted patterns in their attack routes. The Hunters always targeted the same types of systems first. They always approached from the same directions. They always used the same formation. Most, telling of all, they had never encountered resistance. Every species they had fought had either fled or been destroyed quickly. The Void Hunters had never faced an enemy that fought back effectively. Colonel Matt Thompson pulled up human military doctrine and compared it to Council defensive strategies. Council fleets were designed for careful engagement and strategic withdrawal. Their weapons prioritized efficiency, and their shields focused on endurance. Everything about Council military technology was built for survival, not victory. Human military doctrine was completely different. Human weapons were designed to adapt in real time to enemy defenses. Human shields grew stronger under sustained attack. Human ship designs treated combat as a problem to be solved rather than a disaster to be survived. Engineer Amy Foster showed the aliens something they had never seen before: weapons that learned from each engagement and modified themselves to be more effective shield systems that analyzed incoming attacks and developed specific countermeasure ships that could rebuild themselves during battle using automated repair systems. The technology was not just advanced, it was revolutionary. But more important than the technology was the thinking behind it. Humans did not see the Void Hunters as an unstoppable force. They saw them as an invasion that could be repelled. Lieutenant Nick Parker presented tactical analyses that terrified the Council. While other species planned to hide for another 5,000 years, humans were designing an offensive strategy. They wanted to meet the Void Hunters at the galactic rim and destroy them before they could reach populated systems. The plan required coordination between all Council fleets and technologies. Human, adaptive systems combined with Krillian energy weapons. Sectoid hive mind networks coordinating with Nebulon stealth technology aquatic, Marin defensive shields protecting human assault ships. Every species contributing their strengths to a unified battle plan. Admiral John Pierce addressed the council with calm certainty. "We understand your fear," he said. "We understand that hiding has worked before, but hiding is not victory. Survival is not the same as success. For 5,000 years, the Void Hunters have terrorized this galaxy whenever they choose to return. They leave and you rebuild. They return and you hide. The cycle continues forever. We offer you a chance to end that cycle." Captain Derek Morgan displayed human colony records that showed something remarkable. Every human settlement included disaster response teams trained for impossible scenarios. Children learned evacuation procedures, but they also learned to fight. Civilians knew how to hide, but they also knew how to resist. Humanity had never accepted that any enemy was truly unbeatable. The council delegates whispered among themselves in dozens of languages. The Krillians argued about whether humans were brave or suicidal. The Nebulans calculated odds and found them impossibly low. The sectoids buzzed with conflicting opinions from their hive minds. But beneath the fear and uncertainty, something else was growing. For the first time in 5,000 years, someone was offering them hope, instead of just survival. Dr. Helen Carter stood and spoke, with the quiet authority of someone who understood the deeper implications. "This is not just about military victory," she said. "This is about who you choose to be as a civilization. You can remain the species that hides from the dark, or you can become the species that brings light to the darkness. The choice will define your future for the next 5,000 years." Counselor Vex Prime looked at the human delegation with all four eyes, reflecting ancient fears and new possibilities. "If we do this," she said, "if we follow your plan and fight instead of hiding, what happens if we lose?" General Rebecca Stone smiled with the confidence of someone who had never accepted defeat as inevitable. "Then we lose fighting for something we believe in," she said, "instead of losing while hiding from something we fear. But we are not going to lose. Because for the first time in galactic history, the Void Hunters are going to face prey that fights back, and they have no idea what that means." The vote to approve the human battle plan was closer than anyone expected, but when it passed, the galaxy began preparing for the first offensive war in its recorded history. The age of hiding was ending. The age of fighting back had begun.